The highway stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an endless expanse of darkness. The glow of my headlights barely pierced the inky black, revealing nothing but the cracked pavement and the occasional reflective eyes of animals lurking at the roadside. The clock on my dashboard read 2:37 a.m. I had been driving for hours, the hum of my tires on the road the only company in the desolate night. My destination was still hours away, but exhaustion was clawing at the edges of my focus. Pulling over to rest wasn't an option, not out here in the middle of nowhere. Besides, I'd heard too many stories about travelers vanishing on these lonely highways. My unease deepened when the road ahead became cloaked in a thick, unnatural fog. It was as if the night itself had decided to close in on me. I flicked on my high beams, but the dense mist swallowed the light whole. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I slowed to a cautious crawl, the rhythmic thump of my heart matching the ticking of my turn signal as I checked for a safe pull-off point. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, a phantom conjured by my weary mind, but as I drew closer, the figure became clearer. A man, tall and gaunt, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the headlights. He was dressed in tattered clothes that hung from his frame like rags, and his face was obscured by the gleam of a wide green cap. I hit the brakes, my car screeching to a halt just a few feet from him. He didn't move, he didn't flinch. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly as if he were studying me. I rolled down my window just enough to call out, "Hey! Are you okay?" He didn't respond. The silence was suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to drive, to leave him behind, but something about the way he stood there kept me frozen. Suddenly, he lifted one skeletal hand and pointed down the road. My eyes followed the direction of his finger, but all I could see was more fog. When I looked back, he was gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to keep going. I told myself it was just my imagination, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The fog thickened as I drove on, clinging to the car like a living thing. My headlights barely lit the way, and the shapes in the mist began to take on sinister forms. Trees became hunched figures, their branches outstretched like claws. Shadows darted in and out of the periphery, too fast to identify, but slow enough to unsettle.
Then the sound started. At first it was faint, a low guttural whisper that seemed to seep in through the vents. I turned off the radio thinking it was interference, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. It was like a chorus of voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My skin prickled, and I turned the heater off, hoping that would stop it. It didn't. A loud thud jolted me from my rising panic. Something had hit the roof of my car, hard. My heart leapt into my throat as I pulled over to the side of the road, my shaking hands fumbling to switch on the interior light. I peered through the windshield, but the fog made it impossible to see anything. With a deep breath, I reached for the door handle. Logic told me it was probably a branch or some debris, but my gut churned with dread. Stepping out of the car, I was immediately enveloped by the fog. The cold air bit at my skin as I rounded the vehicle, flashlight in hand. I aimed the beam at the roof, but there was nothing there. No branch, no debris, nothing that could have caused the noise. And then I saw the footprints. They were on the roof of my car, impossibly large and wet, as if someone had been standing there moments ago. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the area, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the fog. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing all around me. Panic surged, and I scrambled back into the car, locking the doors. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, and I floored the gas, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was out there. The road seemed endless, the fog growing thicker with every mile. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the gaunt man or something worse. But the mirror showed only darkness, an oppressive void,
that felt as though it were closing in on me. That's when the headlights appeared. They came out of nowhere, bright and blinding in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved, thinking it was another car. But relief quickly turned to terror as the lights bore down on me, closing the gap at an impossible speed. I slammed on the gas, my car lurching forward, but the lights stayed with me, too close, too fast. I tried to wave them off, but there was no response, no honk, no flash of brights, just those two glaring eyes following me relentlessly. Then they vanished. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. My heart pounded as I scanned the mirror, but the road behind me was empty. The whispers returned, louder
and more insistent, and I swore I could see shapes moving in the fog outside my windows. The man appeared again, standing in the middle of the road. This time I didn't stop. I swerved, narrowly missing him, but as I passed I caught a glimpse of his face. It was a hollow mask, eyeless and grinning, his mouth impossibly wide and filled with sharp black teeth. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as I sped down the road. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices rising to a fever pitch. The fog seemed to thicken around me, pressing against the windows like a living thing, and then everything went silent. The fog lifted, and the road stretched out before me, clear and empty. My headlights illuminated a sign that read, "Welcome to Black Hollow." A name I didn't recognize, but one that filled me with an inexplicable dread. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, the screen lighting up with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. "You've arrived." I stared at the message, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I looked up, the gaunt man was standing just beyond the sign, his eyeless face turned toward me. The car died. The lights, the engine, everything. The whispers returned, louder than ever, as the fog closed in around me once more. This time, there was no escape.
Driving at night always had a strange allure for me. The solitude, the endless ribbon of road illuminated by the glow of headlights, and the promise of peace. But this time, the night felt different. It was the kind of night where the darkness seemed heavier, the quiet too absolute. I was on Route 88, a lonely stretch of highway known more for ghost stories than travelers. The clock on the dashboard read 12:46 a.m., and the silence inside my car was broken only by the faint hum of the tires on asphalt. My playlist had run out hours ago, and I didn't bother restarting it. The solitude was calming, or so I thought. About 20 minutes into the drive, the first sign of trouble appeared. Literally, a weathered, rust-covered road sign that read, "Caution deer crossing," loomed out of the darkness. Nothing unusual, until I passed another identical sign, and then another. By the time I saw the fifth sign in the space of a few miles, my fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's weird," I muttered to myself, glancing at the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, an endless void of darkness. The fog started soon after. Wispy tendrils crept onto the highway, thickening with each passing mile. My high beams barely penetrated the dense mist, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach. I slowed down, the glow of the speedometer reflecting off my tense expression. And then I saw her. She stood on the side of the road, a lone figure in the mist. Her dress was pale and tattered, fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her face was obscured by long, matted hair, and her bare feet stood on the cold pavement as if rooted there. My heart hammered in my chest as I passed her, my headlights momentarily illuminating her figure before she vanished into the fog. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the road behind me was empty once again. "Get a grip," I muttered, shaking my head. It was late, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That was the logical explanation. But deep down, I knew logic had nothing to do with what I had seen. I pressed on.
determined to put distance between myself and whatever that was. But the road seemed endless, and the fog grew thicker, curling around my car like it was alive. My headlights reflected off the mist, giving the illusion of shapes moving within it. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes watching me. The clock on the dashboard flickered, then reset to 12:00. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped the clock, but it stayed frozen, its pale blue light casting an eerie glow over the dashboard. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, my voice trembling.
As if in response, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the car, and beneath it, faint whispers, indistinct and chilling. My hand shot out to turn it off, but the whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand. It wasn't English, or any language I'd ever heard. The sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was everywhere, surrounding me, pressing against my ears. And then, the headlights appeared. Bright, piercing lights exploded into my rearview mirror, blinding me. I squinted, trying to make out the vehicle behind me, but it was impossible. The lights were too intense, too close. I floored the accelerator, my car surging forward, but the lights kept pace, impossibly fast. They bore down on me, and I felt the weight of their presence, oppressive and wrong. My breathing quickened, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. Suddenly the lights vanished. The road was dark again, the oppressive silence returning. I dared a glance in the mirror, but there was nothing. No car, no lights, just the empty road and the impenetrable fog. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to steady my breathing. But before I could recover, I saw the figure again. This time she was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement. My car skidded to a halt mere feet from her. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stood there, her head tilted to one side, her hair still obscuring her face. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. She lifted an arm, pointing to something behind me. I turned, but there was nothing but fog and darkness. When I looked back, she was gone. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the silence. Then I noticed the footprints, wet, muddy prints leading from the spot where she had stood to the side of my car. They stopped at my window. A sharp knock shattered the silence. I jumped, my head snapping to the driver's side window. No one was there. The fog outside swirled, and for a moment, I thought I saw a face, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that bore into mine. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. My hands shook as I slammed the car into drive, the tires spinning before catching the pavement. I sped down the road, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fog began to lift, but the relief was short-lived. Up ahead, the road ended abruptly, dropping off into darkness. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the edge. My headlights illuminated a sign. "Welcome to Hollow Pines. Population 0 inches. The whispers swelled, a deafening cacophony that filled the car. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, and with trembling hands, I picked it up. A single message glowed on the screen. "You shouldn't have come." The car died. The lights, the engine, everything. I was plunged into darkness, the whispers now surrounding me, inside me. And then I saw her face, reflected in the cracked glass of my rearview mirror, her hollow eyes staring back at me. The last thing I heard was her laughter, echoing in the void.
Night driving always gave me a sense of freedom. The open road, the cool air streaming through the cracked window, and the soft hum of the tires against the asphalt, it all felt liberating. But that night, I would learn that the darkness hides more than just an empty road. I was driving home from my parents' house after a late family dinner. The highway was deserted, and the occasional passing car was a rare relief from the emptiness. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 1:12 a.m. A few more hours, and I'd be home. The first sign of unease came when my radio crackled. I had been listening to a podcast, the voices suddenly replaced by static. Annoyed, I tried switching stations, but they were all the same. White noise interspersed with faint, distorted whispers. I turned it off, telling myself it was just poor reception. The second sign came shortly after. I spotted a shape on the side of the road ahead. As my car approached, the shape resolved into the figure of a man. He stood motionless, facing the road, his clothes disheveled and torn. His face was pale, almost luminous in my headlights. I slowed down, expecting him to flag me down, but he didn't move. He just stared. Something about him made my skin crawl. His stillness was unnerving, as if he wasn't alive. I decided not to stop. I veered slightly to give him a wide berth, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. But as I passed, I risked a glance in my rearview mirror. He was gone. My heart raced as I scanned the mirror again, hoping to see a logical explanation. There was nothing but the empty road behind me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to dismiss the encounter as a trick of the light or my imagination. The road stretched on, winding through dense woods. The darkness seemed thicker now, the beams of my headlights swallowed by the void ahead. I'd driven this stretch of highway dozens of times before, but tonight it felt unfamiliar, as if the road had changed when I wasn't looking. Then I saw it. A car parked on the shoulder up ahead, hazard lights blinking. Relief washed over me. Another human presence. I slowed down, pulling up beside the vehicle. It was an old sedan, its paint dull and peeling. The driver's side door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. There was no sign of the driver. "Hello!" I called out, rolling down my window slightly. No response. I scanned the area with my phone's flashlight, but the woods on either side of the highway swallowed the light. A sense of unease crept back in. Something wasn't right. I felt it in my gut. I didn't wait any longer. I rolled up my window and pressed the gas, leaving the sedan behind. But as I drove, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I checked my mirrors repeatedly, half expecting to see something or someone. That's when the thudding started. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the hum of the engine. A rhythmic thump, 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 like something hitting the underside of the car. I slowed down, the sound growing louder, more insistent. My stomach knotted as I considered pulling over. Was it a flat tire? Debris caught in the undercarriage? I stopped the car on the shoulder, leaving the engine running. The night was deathly quiet as I stepped out, flashlight in hand. The cold air bit at my skin, and every
instinct screamed at me to get back in the car and drive, but I crouched down, inspecting the tires and the undercarriage. Nothing, everything looked normal. The thudding stopped. I straightened, the beam of my flashlight scanning the woods around me. Shadows shifted between the trees, but I couldn't tell if it was the movement of branches or something else. My breathing quickened. That's when I heard it. A low guttural sound, like a growl, coming from somewhere in the woods. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I scrambled back into the car, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel and sped off, the tires screeching against the pavement. The growl followed me. Or maybe it was just my imagination amplified by fear. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me, just out of sight. The road ahead seemed endless, the trees pressing in on either side. Then the figure appeared again. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt mere feet from him. My heart pounded as I stared at the man through the windshield. It was the same man from before, his pale face emotionless, his eyes Wrong. They weren't eyes at all, just dark, empty sockets. He raised one hand, pointing to something behind me. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My hands gripped the wheel, my knuckles white as the air inside the car grew colder. I heard movement, the sound of something scraping against the trunk, and then a voice. "Why did you stop?" It came from the back seat. I spun around, but the back seat was empty. My breath came in short gasps, my vision blurring with panic. When I looked back at the road, the man was gone. The car's engine sputtered, the lights flickering before everything went dark. I was left in silence. No engine, no lights, just the suffocating darkness and the faint sound of breathing that wasn't mine. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the cold touch of a hand on my shoulder and a whisper so close it felt like it came from inside my own head. "You should have kept driving."
The night was blacker than usual, a suffocating blanket of darkness that swallowed the faint glow of my car's headlights. I was alone on the highway, miles of empty road stretching endlessly ahead and behind me. The hum of the tires on asphalt was my only companion, steady and hypnotic, lulling me into a dangerous sense of calm. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 3:13 a.m. I'd been driving for hours, the journey back home dragging on longer than I'd anticipated. Fatigue gnawed at my mind, but I couldn't stop. Not here, in the middle of nowhere. Then I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated by my headlights for just a moment before disappearing into the darkness as I sped past. My heart leapt into my throat, and I instinctively hit the brakes. The car screeched to a stop, the sudden silence almost deafening. The figure, a woman, had been barefoot, wearing a tattered white dress, her head bowed so I couldn't see her face. I hesitated, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. Logic told me to drive away, but a nagging sense of guilt crept in. What if she needed help? What if she was stranded out here alone? Against my better judgment, I reversed the car slowly, the red glow of my taillights cutting through the night. She wasn't there. I rolled down the window, the cool night air chilling my skin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. There was no reply, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I scanned the area with my flashlight, but the roadside was empty. Unease settled in my chest as I put the car in gear and continued driving, my heart pounding faster than before. A few miles down the road, the radio crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on, but now it blared static so loud it made me jump. I fumbled with the dial, trying to turn it off, but the static only grew louder, more distorted. Among the noise, I could hear something. A voice, faint and distant, whispering words I couldn't understand. My hands shook as I yanked the power cord, silencing the radio. The relief was short-lived. A soft tapping sound echoed through the car, coming from the rear window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, my blood running cold. My rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. Yet the tapping continued, insistent and rhythmic. I mustered the courage to glance over my shoulder, my breath catching in my throat. There was no one there. But as I turned back to the road, my headlights illuminated her. The woman was standing in the middle of the highway, her dress billowing as if caught in a non-existent wind. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, her face hidden by her matted hair. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from her. She didn't move. "Are you okay?" I shouted, my voice trembling. She remained still, her silence more terrifying than any scream. Then slowly she raised her head. Her eyes were hollow sockets, black as the void around us, and her mouth stretched into an unnatural, jagged grin that seemed to split her face in two. I screamed, throwing the car into reverse. The engine roared as I sped backward, desperate to put distance between us, but she didn't stay in place. She moved toward me, her body jerking and twisting as if her limbs were broken, yet she closed the gap impossibly fast. The car stalled. Panic surged as I turned the key, my trembling hands fumbling with the ignition. The engine sputtered, refusing to start. The tapping returned, louder now, coming from all sides of the car. I couldn't see anything, the darkness pressing in on me from every angle. My breath came in shallow gasps, the air inside the car growing colder with each passing second. A whisper slid into my ear, close and intimate, as though someone was sitting in the passenger seat beside me. "Why did you stop?" I turned sharply, but the seat was empty. The woman was now at my window, her face pressed against the glass, her jagged grin stretching wider as she stared at me with those empty sockets. Her hands slapped against the window, smearing it with dark, wet streaks that reeked of decay. The car roared to life just as she began pounding on the glass. I didn't think, I just floored the gas, swerving back onto the highway. My tires screeched, the car fishtailing before regaining traction. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her chasing me. She was in the back seat. Her grin was gone, replaced by an expression of pure hatred. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, a guttural scream ripping through the car as she lunged toward me. I swerved violently, the car careening off the road and into a ditch. The impact knocked the wind out of me, the world spinning as I struggled to regain my bearings. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. The car was silent, the night still. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, but it was dead, the screen refusing to light up. I tried the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. I was stranded, and then I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel beside the car. I locked the doors, my eyes darting to every shadow outside the windows. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a soft tapping on the roof of the car. Tap, tap, tap. The whisper returned, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You can't run." The tapping turned into banging, the entire car shaking as if something massive was trying to get in. My screams were drowned out by the sound of shattering glass as darkness poured into the car, swallowing me whole. When I woke up, the car was back on the highway, idling in the middle of the road. The clock read 3:13 a.m., exactly the time I'd first seen her. The road ahead was empty, the night eerily silent. My trembling hands gripped the wheel as I sped off, vowing never to stop again. But the tapping, it never stopped. The open road stretched endlessly ahead, a black ribbon cutting through the vast emptiness of the countryside. My car's headlights sliced through the darkness, revealing only fleeting glimpses of the asphalt and the occasional skeletal outline of leafless trees. It was supposed to be a quick drive home, but it was nearing midnight, and the isolated road seemed to stretch forever. The radio had given up hours ago, reduced to static, and my phone was out of range. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle from my nearly empty fuel tank. I glanced at the dashboard. Just enough gas to make it to the next town, I told myself, though I hadn't seen a gas station or even a road sign for miles. That's when I saw the hitchhiker. He stood at the edge of the road, illuminated by my headlights. His thumb was out, and he looked oddly out of place, wearing a thin jacket despite the biting cold. His face was pale, almost too pale, and his eyes seemed to catch the light in a way that made me uneasy. Something about him screamed wrong, but loneliness and the creeping fatigue clouded my judgment. I slowed the car to a crawl, rolling down the window just enough to speak. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice sounding louder than I expected in the oppressive quiet. He didn't answer right away, just smiled, his lips curling unnaturally wide. "Anywhere but here," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. Against every instinct screaming at me to keep driving, I unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in without a word, his presence filling the small car with an unsettling chill. He smelled faintly of earth, like freshly turned soil, and his hands rested in his lap, pale and unmoving. "Where are you coming from?" I asked, trying to dispel the heavy silence. He turned to look at me, his smile still plastered across his face. "Nowhere," he replied. "Just needed a ride." The unease in my chest grew, but I forced myself to focus on the road. The hitchhiker didn't seem interested in conversation, staring out the window as if watching something I couldn't see. I tried to ignore him, but the air in the car felt heavier with every passing mile. Then, the car radio crackled to life. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd turned it off hours ago, but now it blared static, loud and jarring. I reached to shut it off, but the hitchhiker's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with an icy strength. "Don't," he said, his voice sharper now. "It's rude to interrupt." "Interrupt what?" Before I could ask, the static shifted, morphing into a low, distorted voice. It spoke in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant. The hitchhiker leaned back in his seat, his grin widening as he listened. I yanked my hand away and turned the volume knob, but the voice only grew louder. My heart pounded as I slammed the brakes, pulling the car to the side of the road. "Get out," I demanded, my voice trembling. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not playing." The hitchhiker didn't move. His eyes, now black as coal, met mine in the dim light. "You invited me," he said softly, almost mockingly. "You can't take it back now." The engine sputtered and died, the lights flickering out. We were plunged into complete darkness, the only sound the eerie chant from the radio. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen stayed black, refusing to turn on. Panic crawled at me as I turned back to the hitchhiker. He was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The chant grew deafening as shadows shifted outside. A tap on the window revealed the hitchhiker, grinning wide. He whispered, "Run!" The locks clicked open, and icy cold filled the car. I bolted into the dark, footsteps closing in until I fell. I woke back in the car, clock reset to 12 a.m. As I sped off, my phone buzzed with a message. "Thanks for the ride.